follow the webcast in French to please follow the directions on the slide. So for me, I know I'm very excited to be here at Sleep 101 because to prepare for this session, I closed about 50 tabs in Google that have been keeping me up at night. I wanted to just quickly start by thanking our sponsors, the Arthritis Society, Nicola Wealth Management, Amgen, AbbVie, and Sobi. I'm especially excited to welcome the Arthritis Society as a brand new sponsor for our 2022 education series today. And of course, we're thrilled to work with every partner that we can in our vision of a pain-free future for kids. But it's especially exciting to work with partners like the Arthritis Society who share our commitment to research, advocacy, and education, and with whom we know we can achieve so much more together than apart. One thing that we're really excited about is that including tonight's session, which will be posted online, you can actually access in our virtual library every single session we've done to date. So you can see a bunch of different sessions there, wherever you are in your journey with your family and rheumatic disease. No doubt we have a ton of information for you. So please do visit our website at cassieandfriends.ca. This includes actually a growing classroom resource section where we've actually indexed all of the Q&As from our live sessions, as well as real patient and family stories, and a bunch of useful resources like a school toolkit for communication with teachers. So quickly, we'll just take a moment. I think in the chat, people have already started to introduce yourselves, but one of the great features of these sessions is just that opportunity to see that there are others living with rheumatic disease. And of course, you can see here we have 27 cities in Canada represented. And maybe as a good icebreaker, we could introduce ourselves and say how many solid hours of sleep we've been getting each night. One of the last things I want to mention is that on our Facebook group, which is Juvenile Arthritis Canada, this is a place where any issue that comes up tonight or anytime, you can connect with actually now 460 other Canadian parents of children with juvenile arthritis across Canada. And we're always posting events, so it's a great place to keep up to date and connect with others. So right after this session, we will be sending out a survey, and we really appreciate any feedback as well as ideas for future events. Our next session on March 15th will be about chronic pain, managing chronic pain. Dr. Tara McGrath is an amazing speaker and expert on this topic, so I really hope you'll join in. And finally, March is Juvenile Arthritis Awareness Month. So we'll be having a ton of activities, including launching our 15 years of Team Cassie and Friends, which is our annual run walk. So I encourage everyone to visit cassieandfriends.ca/run to see how you can get involved. If you have a question, we're about to get the session started. You can use the Q&A button below. We will have, after the presentation, a full Q&A session. So please do bring your questions and we'll do our best to answer all of them. If there's any we missed or you think of something later on, you can always just email info@cassieandfriends.ca. Okay, so without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce our speakers. So Dr. Glenn Landry, I was just saying in the intro, is a bit of a legend here at Cassie and Friends because we actually had Dr. Landry present at one of our Cassie and Friends family days. And it was the first time we'd done a sleep session, and the reviews were rave reviews. Everybody got something out of this session, and I think parents weren't expecting not only to get information about helping their child sleep, but really some amazing information that will revolutionize their own lives. Dr. Glenn Landry has 25 years of experience and research in this area, so no doubt that will come through in his presentation. Joining Dr. Landry, who will be coming in for the Q&A, is Sarah James. Sarah James was also a speaker at a past Cassie and Friends Family Day on our school panel, and she's an occupational therapist at BC Children's Hospital and has been an amazing part of the Cassie and Friends community. And she'll be here to really answer any specific questions regarding concerns about pediatric rheumatology or your child's disease and that impact on sleep, as well as a lot of tips and tools for really pediatric focused supports. So with that, I'm really, really excited to pass this session over to Dr. Landry. I've got my own notebook and pencil, and I'm here to learn. So let's get started.
Okay. Well, thanks for that intro. Much appreciated. And thank you everyone for joining in on the session today. Really excited to get to do another session for Cassie and Friends. And it's jam-packed, so we'll just jump right into it. Again, this session is really focused on, I understand that we've got kids and we need to, help the kids sleep, but this is really for the whole family. And so we all need our sleep. It helps us become our best selves. And so that's what the focus is for today's talk. But before I get into that, I know we're all really tired of talking about COVID-19, but I think it's well worth a few minutes just to help people understand that healthy sleep can actually combat COVID-19. All right, so very quickly, when we're dealing with a pandemic such as COVID-19, one of the key factors is we want to reduce the reproduction rate. And the reproduction rate is really just the speed at which a disease spreads throughout a population. And it's a function of really two factors. One is the transmission rate, the ease with which it passes from person to person, and the recovery rate, how quickly a person that gets COVID-19 is able to recover from COVID-19. And so if we want to reduce the reproduction rate, which is the goal here, then we need to either decrease the transmission rate, make it more difficult to spread, or increase the recovery rate so that it doesn't have as much of a chance to spread throughout the population. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because sleep's actually unique in that it has the opportunity, if we get healthy sleep, to both decrease transmission rate and increase recovery rate. So I'm going to take you through a bit of this. Forgive the science for a bit, but it's really important. This was a study that was done with college students. And so now this study here, actually, this is, again, the understanding that sleep is huge for immune functioning. We've known it for decades. So that's consensus science. But this was a fun study that really kind of brought that point home. What they did is they used a nasal spray of the common cold. So it's not COVID-19 that they're spreading for these college students, but each student that participated in the study was given a nasal spray with the common cold. So we've got a situation where you've got 100% exposure within the test group. But what they did first is they measured those students' sleep in advance for a couple of weeks before the exposure. And what came out of that data was really cool from a sleep geek perspective. What it showed is that the individuals were getting more sleep actually had much reduced risk of actually converting to getting the common cold. Everybody was exposed, 100% exposure, but what you see is that individuals that were getting less than 5 hours sleep in the couple of weeks on average before exposure, they had a much higher conversion rate, over 45%. But the people that were getting greater than 7 hours of actual sleep, and this is actigraphically measured, so think research grade Fitbit, what we see is that you have a dramatic reduction in the risk of actually getting the cold. In other words, our immune system is primed so that it can actually fight it off before you get the cold. That's the key measurement here. And so just to give you some numbers on this, in the general population, we know that the average individual, I'm going to show you this data in a bit, but the average individual worldwide is getting somewhere between 6 and 7 hours of actual sleep each night. It's closer to 6.5 hours. And so if we take the average individual and we give them an extra hour's worth of sleep, we could get a 20% reduction in the risk of infection, even if there's 100% exposure. In the shift worker population, for parents out there that are shift workers, we know that the sleep duration is even less. The average shift worker is getting between 5 and 6 hours of actual sleep each night. And so if we were able to get them to get their 7 hours actual sleep each night, we could get a 30% reduction in the risk of infection. Now, as I said, this was for the common cold, but the point is that the immune system function, it's exactly the same for a pathogen like COVID-19. In other words, sleep's critical to boost immune system functioning to reduce the risk of actually converting and getting the infection. So this data is still valid for all kinds of pathogens. Now, the other piece is the recovery rate, and I won't take you through all of these different levels of immune system functioning, but what I will tell you is that there's multiple levels of immune system functioning that are impacted by our sleep health status. And when we get greater sleep, these immune functions are more efficient and better able to fight off pathogens. And so that increases recovery rate and reduces the lived experience of whatever that pathogen was. So in this example, we're talking about COVID-19. And what I really want you to understand is that when we're faced with a pathogen, the objective is to, combat that pathogen to reduce the reproduction rate. And the way to do that isn't just, and don't get me wrong, I understand the importance of PPE, personal protective equipment, masks, and vaccinations. I'm a science guy. I understand the importance of that. But where I think we're really missing an opportunity is that we've known for decades that sleep is changing in our society and people are getting less and less sleep. Part of the reason for that is that sleep is actually the first thing we sacrifice to meet the growing demands of work, family, and social life balance. And if you're dealing with juvenile arthritis, then you're at a greater challenge within the household. And so you're likely sacrificing sleep just like the rest of the world, but probably to a greater extent. And so the point that I want to make is that sleep and protecting our sleep, that's the mask we wear from within. And it works for any pathogen. So we don't have to worry about which particular COVID variant that we have to deal with, like Omicron versus Delta. What we can do is improve our sleep so our immune system is better able to identify pathogens no matter what the variant and to be able to address, target, and destroy them. All right, so that's enough about COVID-19. I hope you get the message that sleep health is critical for us. And it's always been important, but perhaps now it's even more important. And as I had just mentioned, we're all sleep deprived. We know the consensus science shows that people are getting less and less sleep. And that's a key factor. Sorry, I'm just having one issue. All right. So it's a key factor in understanding our overall sleep health status, that we're not getting enough sleep. And we have the tools now that are commercially available. And in all of our coaching that we do, we use Fitbit data. And so we have the tools now to actually objectively measure our sleep health status. We use Fitbit not because I have shares in the company. I don't have any vested interest in Fitbit whatsoever. I know that there's lots of different wearable technology. There's the Whoop, there's Oura Ring, there's Garmin products. But in my research experience, and again, that's over 25 years of research, and also 7 years in practice, clinical private practice now, where I'm coaching people to improve their sleep quality. And I'm working with older adults, meaning 30 plus. I'm working with shift workers and families with children that are having difficulty sleeping. And the Fitbit provides us the best data in terms of understanding people's sleep stages, their actual data, the sleep architecture. So I'm going to take you through this, but first, before I do that, I want to just mention, I had said that we're not getting enough sleep, and this is the data that matches epidemiological studies that have been done worldwide. This is Fitbit data aggregate data of millions of users around the world. And what it shows is the average user is actually going to bed right around 11:30, round numbers here, and getting up around 7:30. That's an 8-hour sleep window. We're all told that we need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. So you would think if you're in bed for those 8 hours that you're getting the sleep you need. And the shocker here is that the actual sleep is about 6 hours, 38 minutes. They're getting just over 6.5 hours. And this is important because that sleep duration isn't enough to do all of the wonderful things that sleep does. And so the average individual worldwide isn't getting enough sleep, even though they might think they are. What does that mean? If we're not getting the sleep that we need, it means that we're increasing our risk of cardiovascular disease, inflammation, obesity, type 2 diabetes, dementia, and cancer. What's really happening here is that when we don't get the sleep we need, we're engaging our sympathetic nervous system. You can think of this as the fight or flight response. So when we lengthen our days, we're actually engaging a system that's designed to provide brief periods of superhuman performance. But the problem is when we're chronically sleep deprived, we're taking a natural function that gives us peak performance for a brief window, but we're actually taking it beyond its intended design, and we are over engaging it. And so what we're doing is we're accelerating aging. And so that's what's putting us at greater risk. By not getting the sleep we need, we're accelerating our aging. And you may feel like you're functioning well, that you're able to compensate. And the truth is that our brain and our bodies are able to compensate for a long time. When we're looking at these diseases here, we're talking about a decades-long process. So when I talk about increased risk, I'm not talking about tomorrow. I'm talking about borrowing from your retirement. Think of it as borrowing from the health of your retirement years, accelerating the aging. If there's any of you out there that are thinking to yourselves, Glenn, I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't have time to sleep. I've got a ton of things to do. Everything that I do matters. And so I can't afford to get sleep. I'll sleep when I'm dead. The sad news that I'm about to give you tonight is that you're going to get there a lot faster than you think. And those final years aren't going to be near as healthy as they otherwise would be if you protected your sleep now. So that's a critical part. And now I understand I'm harping about the sleep, and sleep isn't everything. I'm a sleep geek. I know that it isn't everything, but sleep does play a critical role in every aspect of human health and performance in some way. And so it's important for us to really understand why that would be the case. The first thing I want you to understand is that wakefulness is actually toxic. Okay, so what we're going to show you here is at the bottom, this is just hours of sustained wakefulness. So from the point that you wake up in the morning, the longer you've been awake, the greater your need for sleep. The truth is that your brain and your body, it's like an engine. It's producing exhaust. And this is what I mean when I say that wakefulness is toxic. We are producing exhaust as a normal function of wakefulness, sustained wakefulness. But have no fear, because we have a designed process to wash away that day's waste, and it's called sleep. And so as long as we get 8 hours of actual sleep, between 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep, as long as we're getting that, then we begin the next day with a well-washed brain and body, and we're good to go. But what happens when we don't get the sleep we need? This is what I want you to understand. Now, I'm focusing on the brain right now, but this is true for the body as well. All of our tissues throughout our brain and body. But just to give you a sense of this, as I said, brain's like an engine. So here we see these neurons, they're functioning and they're processing. And as that's happening, we're accumulating a sleep need. We're building up toxicity in our brains. But as long as we get the sleep we need, we begin the next day with a well-washed brain and we start without any impairment. But let's say that instead of getting 8 hours of sleep and 7 hours of actual sleep, let's say that we're getting about an hour less. Let's say we're only spending about 7 hours in bed and we're only getting 6 hours of sleep. Well, then what's happening is that we're not able to finish the sleep's job. And so we are beginning to accumulate this toxicity, and it actually starts in the front of the brain. Okay, you can think of it as this is a view from the side, and so here is the front of the brain, and we're looking at it from the side, and it's this toxic wave that the successive nights of getting less sleep than we actually need, we are accumulating this toxicity in the front of the brain. And this matters because that front of the brain is critical. It's the CEO of the brain. Think of it as what's responsible for our reason, our logic, and our decision making. All of these things matter. And so when we are not getting the sleep that we need, it actually changes who we are. We aren't who we think we are. We aren't our best selves. When we're not getting the sleep we need, this brake pedal, that is the executive function, the CEO of the brain, it becomes non-functional. It is disconnected from the other parts of the brain in terms of operating as a brake pedal. And this matters because there are some gas pedals in the brain. Our emotional reactivity. For this slide, I'm actually simplifying here, and I'm just talking about it in the sense of the amygdala, but you can think of that as the emotional center of the brain. And so that is our reactivity to our environment and what's happening and how we respond to everything that's happening in our lives. So that emotional reactivity is a gas pedal. And in order for us to control our emotions, not to get too high and not to get too low, it's critical that we have a fully functioning CEO of the brain. So this is the brake pedal, this is a gas pedal. Another part, and actually before I go to the next part, let's just talk about kids for a second. We've known as parents, let's say that we have a young child who's having a temper tantrum in the store because they can't get what they want. We know that, let's say his name's Jimmy. We know that Jimmy isn't maladapted, isn't in need of psych services. We know as parents, Jimmy, you're tired. You need a nap. You're grumpy. You've lost control because you need a nap. The interesting thing is we know that as parents, but we lose that connection when we think of it as adults. The truth is that same thing is happening. We have better controls as adults, but when we're not getting the sleep we need, we become more irritable. We become more emotionally reactive to our surroundings. So that's a key piece. Another piece is understanding the reward system of the brain. So again, I'm simplifying, talking about the striatum here, but you can think of this as our risk-reward center of the brain. Our appetite, our adrenaline junkie component, if you will, that seeking the high of adrenaline. Now, the thing is that when we're sleep deprived, the gas pedal is disconnected, this gas pedal is disconnected from the brake pedal. And so it actually changes the way we assess risk. We know this both in real world scenarios as well as in the lab. This is consensus science. We know that individuals will tend to overestimate the benefit of a given action when they're tired and underestimate the risk that's associated with that given action. So it actually makes us riskier. We tend to go toward high risk, high reward. But the perception is that we have high reward when in fact the reward is not near as high as we actually think it is. And so it changes us. It makes us make bad decisions. So that's a key thing. We aren't who we think we are, and we're not who we are trained to be when we're sleep deprived. Okay, so I'm hoping that I realize I've pummeled you there with a ton of science and really harped why it's so important that we get the sleep we need. And I understand that a lot of you may be thinking to yourself, well, yeah, I know that sleep's important, but what does that mean? Like, what with CRS, circadian rhythms and sleep, we coach people to become elite sleepers. And so it's important to really understand, well, what does that mean? What is elite sleep? And the key there is understanding that it isn't just hours spent in bed trying to sleep. In fact, it's not just how many hours of actual sleep you got. I realize that I've been talking about how we need to get 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep each night. And it's actually deeper than that. We need to actually understand something called sleep architecture. Sleep architecture is just a fancy way of saying that we cycle through our sleep window, we cycle through different stages of sleep. And what you're seeing here is Fitbit data. And when I'm talking about elite sleep, just to be clear, what we're looking at here is periods of wakefulness throughout the night. Notice that we do have periods of wakefulness throughout the night, but if they're really short, we won't remember them. If they begin to be longer than 10 minutes to 15-minute range, if they're longer than that, then we will remember our awakening. So if you're thinking about this without a Fitbit and you're wondering how much sleep you got, one rule of thumb that you could do is think of how many times you were up throughout the night and add at least 15 minutes in wakefulness for each one of those, and then subtract that from the amount of time that you spent in bed. Generally speaking, if you're a reasonable sleeper, if you're spending 8 hours in bed, you're probably getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 hours of actual sleep, hopefully, if you're a good sleeper. Another part is understanding these stages, and this is one of the reasons why we use Fitbit, because their sleep stages are predictive of what we would see in a sleep lab using EEG technology. And so the first thing to understand about elite sleep is that if your brain and your body are ready for sleep, when you go to sleep, you will fall asleep easily and you'll get into deep sleep very quickly. Having fallen asleep, after about 100 minutes, you will cycle into your first bout of REM sleep. This is REM sleep here. And REM sleep's really important. We'll talk about that in a bit. But REM sleep, you'll know that as rapid eye movement sleep. And so what you can see is that from the beginning, we get into deep sleep and then we cycle into REM sleep. Light sleep is not poor sleep. That's a misnomer. Light sleep is just a stage of sleep that's easy to wake someone up out of, whereas deep sleep, it's much harder to wake them up out of that level of sleep. And if you do wake someone up out of deep sleep, they're going to feel groggy. So that's the 3 stages that I want you to understand. These 2, light and deep, are non-REM sleep, and then REM sleep is that rapid eye movement, the dream state sleep that everybody's familiar with. All right, so you can see that we're cycling through. So we go through our first about 100 minutes, and then roughly every 90 minutes, we'll cycle from non-REM sleep to REM and then back into non-REM. But if we break the sleep window into 2 halves, a key thing is different about those 2 halves. One is you can see that in the front half of sleep, really good sleep, elite sleep, you'll see a ton of deep sleep in the non-REM component of the sleep window, alternating with REM. And the other thing you'll notice is that the REM bouts get longer and longer, and that we tend to get much more REM sleep in the back half of our sleep window, alternating with light sleep in the back half instead of deep sleep. So you're going to find out more about this, but what deep sleep is doing is washing the brain. So there's a stage, it's called slow wave sleep. It's these long, slow waves that are seen in the polysomnography for sleep recordings. And that is the stage of sleep that washes the brain, grows new neurons, restores and repairs tissues throughout the brain and body. And it plays a key role in immune system functioning. So this deep sleep is critical. The reason I'm telling you and taking you through all of this and telling you about sleep staging is because you can get yourself a Fitbit. And now after today's talk, you'll better understand what that Fitbit is telling you. For a lot of people, they just don't understand the data. They don't know what Fitbit's really telling them. And so there's so much information that you can get from your Fitbit. So that's what I hope you'll get from today's talk. So having said that, what I'm going to do now, we've talked about a little bit about elite sleep. And what I'm going to do next is take you through some data from people that came to our it's not a lab anymore, but our company, and we did the coaching. And so here's some examples where this was actually a healthcare professional that worked in the mental health arena. And he was interested in our company, looking at what we could do for his clients. And so the interesting thing that I want to show you here is this individual, when he came to us, he was thinking of himself as a great sleeper, but was interested in our program for his clients. So the first thing, and the reason I'm bringing this up, is I encourage all of you to use the existing technology. A Fitbit right now that does sleep stages you can get for somewhere in the neighborhood of about $130 to $150. So this is readily available technology to us. And so when he came in, we did a baseline test to see what his sleep was like. And this is after a couple of weeks, this baseline data. And you can see we're comparing this to the average Fitbit user. And remember, the average Fitbit user isn't getting enough sleep. Okay. And so he was actually underperforming in terms of his duration. He was getting less than the average Fitbit user. He was getting just over 6 hours of sleep each night, 6 hours actual. So not quite 6.5, in fact. But then when we did a deeper dive, you could see that he wasn't getting the REM sleep that he needed. He was deficient in REM, and he was also deficient in the deep sleep. Now, REM sleep consolidates learning and memory. It processes trauma, and it plays a key role in our ability to cope with stress and pain, psychological stress. And so REM's really important, and deep sleep obviously really important as well. REM sleep plays a key role in a particular form of learning and memory. You can think of it as fact-based or knowledge acquisition. Light sleep is critical for a different kind of muscle memory, or a different kind of consolidation of learning and memory called muscle memory. And so with light sleep, you can think of it as a very important stage of sleep because it processes our day and it prioritizes the things that need to be remembered versus all the stuff that we're inundated with that can be forgotten. So hopefully a lot of this talk is the important stuff that you will consolidate tonight and remember if you get a really good sleep. All right, so this individual thought he was a great sleeper, but after objective verification of his data, we see that he wasn't. And so he went through the program, and the important thing to notice here is that there are things we can do to improve our sleep, and we actually did. He was with us. He went through the training, and by the time he graduated out, he was overperforming the average Fitbit user, getting at least 7.5 hours of actual sleep each night. He was getting awesome levels of REM, light, and deep sleep. And it's actually easier to see it in this chart. This is when he started with us. And then over the 6-week period that he was with, actually 8 weeks in total, when he was finishing here's this period, he was able to sustain this through the remainder of the program. But you can see the improvement. It's not just in total sleep, though. It's also in his deep sleep numbers, the dark blue here, as well as his REM sleep numbers. So that's a key thing to understand. And so that's understanding the value of measuring our sleep and realizing that it isn't just the number of hours that we get, but the proper staging. Getting deep sleep in the front half to wash our brains, process, and improve immune system functioning, grow new neurons, repair and restore tissues throughout the brain. All of those things in that front half. And then in the back half, we want to use that well-washed brain to consolidate learning and memory, process trauma, and to build resilience to stressors, all of those kinds of things. All right, so I think that now is a good time to take a break. And so what we'll do is we will come back at, let's just make it, we'll just take a quick break, like a 5-minute break. So we'll come back at, let's call it 13 after. Okay, so I'll just, yeah, everybody, what I want you to do for this break is actually get up and move around and break up sedentary time. You're going to learn why that's so important. So we'll come back at 5:13.
I don't know. Mom texted me and was like, "Hey, be ready for baseball. It's gonna be tight." So I'm ready for baseball.
There's no combination of words I could put on the back of a postcard. No song that I could sing, but I can try for your heart. Our dreams, and they are made out of real things, like a shoebox of photographs with sepia tone loving. Love is the answer, at least, for most of the questions in my heart. Like, why are we here and where do we go? And how come it's so hard? It's not always easy, and sometimes life can be deceiving. I'll tell you one thing, it's always better when we're together. It's always better when we're together. Yeah, we'll look at them stars when we're together. Well, it's always better when we're together. Yeah, it's always better when we're together. And all of these moments just might find their way into my dreams tonight. But I know that they'll be gone when the morning light sings or brings new things. But tomorrow night you see that they'll be gone too. Too many things I have to do. But if all of these dreams might find their way into my day-to-day scene, I'll be under the impression I was somewhere in between, with only two, just me and you. Now so many things we got to do, but places we got to be. We'll sit beneath the mango tree now. Yeah, it's always better when we're together. We're somewhere in between together. Well, it's always better when we're together. Yeah, it's always better when we're together. I believe in memories, they look so pretty when I sleep. Hey now and when I wake up, you look so pretty, sleeping next to me. But there is not enough time, and there is no song I could sing, and there is no combination of words I could say, but I will still tell you one thing, we're better together. But I was sitting, waiting, wishing you believed in superstitions that
Okay, well, hopefully we all had a chance to take a break there and break up sedentary time. All right, so the next thing that I want to talk about is why can't I sleep? I want to address, I'm sure there's lots of people out there that are thinking, Glenn, I know sleep's important, but I go to bed and I can't sleep. And so I toss and I turn, and then I get up until I'm ready for sleep, and then I get back to sleep. And by the time the alarm rings in the morning, I know that I haven't gotten enough sleep. Or you may find yourself in a situation where you're exhausted, you're able to get to sleep. But then after 3-4 hours, you wake up and then have great difficulty getting back to sleep. So that's a key part of something we talk about, normal changes in sleep as we get older. And so I want to address these factors and help people understand that there are things that we can do. Okay, so first, let's talk a little bit more about sleep assessments. I want you to understand the importance of really not just your perception of your sleep, so that's called subjective sleep quality. The way you wake up, the way you feel when you wake up has a lot to do with the stage of sleep that you wake up out of. So if you wake up out of, remember we talked about slow wave sleep, if you wake up out of deep sleep, you're going to feel groggy, you're going to feel still tired. But if you wake up out of REM sleep, your brain is already active. So it's much easier to wake up and get going out of REM sleep, which is why there are some programs out there that are designed to wake you up when they detect that you're in REM sleep. And so that's a good thing in terms of being able to be ready to go. But if the device is waking you up out of REM when you get into REM, then you're probably not getting all the REM you actually need. So there's a problem there as well. What we really want is to build a sleep window, protect that sleep window so that you naturally wake up at the time that you're supposed to. So a key part of this is really doing a deep dive and understanding your Fitbit data. And keep in mind that this is something you need to do this for weeks at a time. You want to have multiple weeks and even months of data where you can see how you're doing. It's not just, oh, I got a great sleep last night, I must be fine. In fact, it's quite common for people to go several nights with poor sleep and then finally have a great sleep. We call that a homeostatic sleep drive, where they go through this process of building and building and building a sleep need so that they can finally sleep through the night. And that's not healthy. And so this is something that we want to see. We want to get a sense of where people are in their sleep health status, if you will. And you can do that by collecting Fitbit data. And now, to be clear, Fitbit doesn't provide the same kind of data that you're seeing here, in the sense that we aggregate that data and put it into summaries, but you could just do this manually by just keeping track of the sleep and then a simple Excel sheet and doing that if you wanted to. I'm not saying you have to, but it's something you could do. And so what we want to do is understand the difference between the average Fitbit user and what we would call elite sleep. So you may want to know these things in terms of what's the goal, what's the target. And so what I would say is you want a sleep window that's going to be long enough that you're getting at least 7.5 hours of actual sleep. So 450 minutes is 7.5 hours of actual sleep. And so to do that, you probably have to, be in bed for over 8 hours. And so that's the first thing. The other thing to understand is that you want to have a high sleep efficiency where your brain and body are ready for sleep and are able to use that sleep. So you want to have, somewhere to be elite, you want to be getting a 90% sleep efficiency. Anything below 80% is actually predictive of poor overall health status. In terms of the REM sleep, this is a target where I would say that you want to be shooting, in order to be elite, you want to be shooting for somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 hours of REM sleep. The light sleep, you want to be getting 4 hours at least. And for the deep sleep, you want to be shooting for something in the neighborhood of between 75 and 90 minutes, like hoping to get to 90 minutes. All right. And so here's some data for a client that came to us. And what I want you to see, these bars reflect the time that the person was in bed sleeping. And so what you can see here is, here they went to bed early one night and then really late another night, and then early and then late and then early and late. And what you can see, this is why I actually say that we're all shift workers. This is an individual that was not a shift worker, but it's actually part of our makeup now that we sacrifice sleep to meet the growing demands of work, family, and social life balance, like I said earlier. And so what's happening for many of us is that we'll have a weekday sleep schedule and a weekend sleep schedule. And that's actually that's going against our programming. Our physiology doesn't make a distinction between a Monday, a Wednesday, a Saturday, or a Sunday. Physiologically speaking, our daily needs are the same 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so we need to be much more predictable in our sleep window. The truth is, and I've said this before, our brain and our body needs to be ready for sleep at the time that we've scheduled sleep. And in order for it to be ready for sleep, our brain and bodies must be able to predict our sleep window. So this brings us to the very first key in terms of understanding, if you're having difficulty sleeping, understanding why that might be the case. If you can't fall asleep, it's an indicator that your brain and body aren't ready for sleep at the time that you're wanting to go to bed. So that's key number one. We talk about this in terms of sleep schedule variance. You can think of this as the degree to which we are shift workers. And so this is analysis that we do. It's proprietary. It goes deeper than what you could get from your Fitbit. But essentially, what I want you to understand is that if this is what your sleep schedule looks like, where it's varying from night to night and weekday to weekend, if that's the case, then what you're going to end up with is a situation where you're going to bed, the variance in that sleep schedule has a huge impact on the next piece, which is sleep readiness. Our brain and body need to be ready for sleep at the time that we go to bed. And so we do analysis here, and these are just ideals where in terms of elite sleep, you want to be able to get to sleep easily and quickly, and you want to be able to get into deep sleep early. And so we do analyses to see just how ready people are for sleep and how quickly they get into deep sleep. Here's an example of an individual that's going to bed, is actually falling asleep. So they would think that they're doing well, but when we look at their data, we can see that they're not getting the proper sleep architecture. In fact, this individual is getting REM before they're getting deep sleep. You can think of this, and I'm simplifying here, but you can think of it as, you know, consolidating learning and memory and processing trauma and building resilience. Those are all good things, except it's being done on a dirty brain. So the key there is that we need to wash our brain and our body. We need to build and restore tissues throughout our brain and body. That's job one first. So it's not just what you do that matters. What I want you to understand that is that when you do these things matters as much or even more. And so this is an indication of a person that's actually not ready for sleep and isn't getting the proper sleep architecture. And you'll be able to see this in your Fitbit data. A key thing that I want you to really do is understand what your Fitbit is telling you if you get one, and to get a better sense of what it should look like and what you want to strive toward. All right, another piece, this is after going through the program and working with us, what I want you to understand is that it is possible to take a person that isn't able to get the sleep they need, the sleep architecture. And in fact, this individual routinely, this is just one piece of data, but this individual was routinely waking up after about 4 hours of sleep and then being up for a couple of hours, not being able to get back to sleep. And this is something that's quite common in our society. And so what I want you to understand is that there are things that you can do to go from a person that, you know, is spending lots of time in bed, but not getting the benefit of that with great, well-timed, well-staged sleep. It is possible to actually become a great sleeper. And so it's just about timing and understanding what they need. Another piece that you know, as a rule of thumb, when you're looking at this, is that you want to be getting somewhere in the neighborhood, if you've got a proper sleep window, you want to be getting somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 REM cycles through the night. And so that's an indicator that you've got, you know, a well-timed sleep window. When we talk about sleep architecture, what I want you to understand in terms of analyzing your deep, your light, and your REM sleep, again, I'm repeating myself, but I want you to understand the importance of getting the majority of your deep sleep in the front half of the sleep window. And then in the second half, getting less deep sleep, but much more light sleep and REM sleep. So again, proper sleep architecture. Deep sleep to wash our brains, grow new neurons, build and restore tissues throughout the brain and body, to build immune system functioning, all of the wonderful things it can do in that first half. And then in the back half, that's where we're consolidating learning. We're processing our day, figuring out what needs to be remembered for future success and what can be discarded. Muscle memory, skill acquisition, that's light sleep. And then new knowledge, consolidating, you know, the acquisition of new learning and being able to think of it as skill versus fact-based learning. Those are two different things. And so knowledge acquisition versus skill acquisition. All right, now another key factor. Our brain and body need to be ready for sleep in order to get the sleep we want. But we also have to understand the importance of having a system that's ready for sleep. And so when we have drugs in our system, it has a huge impact on our ability to get sleep. So one of the common drugs that people, and I'm not value judging here at all, but I just want you to understand the impact of, say, something like alcohol. So when we drink alcohol, and in fact, older adults very commonly use alcohol as a self-sleep aid, if you will. Drinking before bed just as a nightcap to help them get to sleep. The thinking being that they'll get better sleep if they have a drink. Well, that's actually incorrect. And the reason it propagates is because alcohol does actually, if you drink enough of it, help you fall asleep. But it's not the sleep you need. Remember that the fact that you've closed your eyes and you're unaware of your environment in sleep doesn't mean that you're getting the staging and the sleep architecture that you need. And so that's key. And we really get to see this. And this is what I love about Fitbit Data. Again, I do not have shares in the company, but I do really appreciate Fitbit Data because it tells us what our sleep is like when we drink alcohol, for example, where we will get some deep sleep in the front half, but then throughout the rest of the night, we don't get near the amount of REM sleep that we otherwise would, and we're not getting the proper staging. And we tend to wake up earlier when we've had, and this is dose dependent, the more you drink, the more impacted your sleep is going to be. But the key takeaway that I want you to get from this is that alcohol is not an effective sleep aid. It results in a drug-induced sleep, but not a physiologically healthy sleep. So think of it as pharmacologically induced sleep versus physiologically healthy sleep. And so they're not the same thing, and that's important. Another drug that's currently being used are sleep aids. This is, you know, even today, if you go to your doc, there's a good chance if you were to tell your doc that you're not getting the sleep you need and that you feel you need help with your sleep, there's still a pretty good chance that your doc's going to say, well, we have a pill for that. And the truth is that we really need to change the conversation. We need to look into why you're not able to get the sleep, and we need to address the root causes of not getting the sleep, because pharmacological induced sleep, drug induced sleep isn't as healthy. In fact, I can tell you that, you know, the latest sleep science is showing that people that are taking, say, Zopiclone or, you know, prescription sleep meds to get sleep, we're seeing that those are designed for brief use, 7 to 10 days. They're not intended for chronic use. And when they are used chronically, we see poor sleep health. And we also see poor human health and performance overall, and accelerated aging. In fact, not to scare anybody out there, but the latest in the science is showing that if you're taking 18 doses in a calendar year of a sleep aid, say like Zopiclone, it increases your all-risk mortality, all-cause mortality by 3-fold. And it dramatically increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease. Part of the reason is because when you are on drugs like sleep aids, you're not getting the proper sleep architecture. Here's an example where this combined use of CBD and a sleep aid is resulting in high slow wave sleep, deep sleep numbers, but very low REM. And this is an important point that I want you to understand, is that when we take drugs, sleepy time tea, it really doesn't matter what drug you're taking. If you're taking a drug that has an impact on driving sleep, like alcohol or any sleep aid, it's a drug-induced sleep, meaning that it's going to promote one stage of sleep, for example, deep sleep, but you can't be in deep sleep and REM sleep at the same time. So the key point here is that you could be promoting deep sleep and inhibiting REM sleep, not getting the sleep you need. Other drugs like antidepressants can have an impact as well, where they may promote REM sleep at the expense of deep. And then some antidepressants might promote deep at the expense of REM. So you really do need to talk to your doc to really understand the impact that the drugs you're taking have on your sleep architecture. And you can, you have the tools now. This is the wonderful thing about technology, is that Fitbits are commercially available at a reasonable price where you could get insight into exactly what your sleep looks like. Let's talk about sleep and aging for a moment now. So we've known for decades that sleep changes as a normal course of aging. In fact, most older adults, 65 plus, more than half complain about not being able to get the sleep they need. In fact, I can tell you, I beat my head against this wall for a very long time in my postdoctoral fellowship and my graduate research years. I published a paper eventually called Buying Time, looking at all the things that I'm talking to you about today in this presentation, presenting to the faculty of medicine, really, health practitioners, and presenting this understanding that older adults aren't getting the sleep they need. Sleep changes as a normal course of aging, but it isn't healthy, and that need not be inevitable. So I'm about to show you what I was talking about there. So we've known again for decades that as we get older, and when I'm talking older adults, let me be clear, I'm talking 30 plus. 30 to 50 is a young older adult, 50 to 70 is a middle older adult, and 70 plus are the real winners in life. But these changes begin in our 30s. They're subtle, so we don't really pay much attention to them in our 30s, but then they become, more of a nuisance in our 40s and our 50s, and we become more aware of them. The changes are simple. We get decreased quantity of sleep, the amount of time that we're actually sleeping. The quality of that sleep, remember, I've been showing you this sleep architecture. The quality of sleep changes as a normal course of aging. And the consolidation, the ability to sustain long bouts of uninterrupted sleep, that is weakened as we get older. I've shown you that in some of the charts where you could see a person being able to fall asleep, get to sleep, but about the 4-hour mark, waking up and then not being able to get to sleep for a few hours. So that's older adult sleep. And then finally, efficiency. Remember, I was talking about that. You can think of sleep efficiency as the percent of time that an individual is actually sleeping for the amount of time that they're spending in bed. And remember earlier, I had said that if you're you're in bed for about an hour, you could 8 hours, you could subtract an hour from that and figure out that your sleep was probably around 7 hours, depending on the individual. Okay, so that's how sleep changes. And for the longest time, it was considered, because it was normal, it was considered just inevitable. It's just a part of getting older. You're not going to be able to sustain sleep. And would you believe there was a time where healthcare professionals would actually say, when an older adult would come into their office and report poor sleep and say that they couldn't sleep, the healthcare professionals at the time would say, well, that's normal. You're not sleeping as much because you don't need as much sleep. And the individual would say, oh, really? And they would say, yeah, you're not doing as much. You're not learning as much. You're not growing new neurons. You're not. Well, we now know that that is all false. Sleep need doesn't change as an adult from 30 to 70. We still need 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep each night. And if you think you're one of those very rare cases that really functions best on 4 to 5 hours, I can tell you that it's highly unlikely that that is true. The vast majority of the population requires 7 to 9 hours of actual sleep for optimal health and performance. The difference is that we can compensate, that we have the ability to still perform. We think we're doing as well, but we're really not. And we think we're still healthy, but the truth is we're borrowing from our retirement, as I had mentioned before. So let me show you. This is now, you can think of this. This was when I was a postdoc at UBC. But this is, think of it as a research grade Fitbit. This is a motion watch. And what it's providing is data that is validated against polysomnography. Think being in the sleep lab and hooked up to the EEG and all the heart rate measurements and that. Now, the benefit of the motion watch is that people would wear that at home and you could get 2 weeks of data. What you're looking at here is each horizontal row is a 24-hour day. These black vertical deflections are the motion that's captured by the motion watch. And then, so we've got 2 weeks of data here, and this pink shaded area, this is key. That's the window during which the individual has reported they were trying to sleep. So there's a number of factors there to make sure that we have the right sleep window. First, there's a button on the motion watch for when they start trying to sleep. They press that button and say, I went to bed. Plus, they had a sleep diary that they would write in when they went to bed and when they got up to start their day. So we know both from the actual data as well as 2 validations of, a sleep diary and the button pressing, that this is the actual sleep window. And so this individual, this is an older adult, age matched to the comparison I'm about to show you. This individual is getting 7.5 hours actual or better on average. Their sleep efficiency is very high, 93%. That's incredibly high for an older adult. And their fragmentation. Now, I mentioned consolidation, the ability to stay asleep. Fragmentation is really the opposite. It's the frequency of sleep disruption. And you can see that this individual, there's periods of wakefulness in here, but it's predominantly time spent asleep, which is why this fragmentation index is below 15. It's a very, very good number. Now, let me show you, this is not reflective of the average older adult. This is a case, you know, think of it as the exception that proves the rule. This is an individual that's doing a wonderful job with their sleep. So it is possible to get great sleep as an older adult. But this is more reflective of what we see on average. So I matched this individual for the sleep window. You can see that they're spending roughly the same amount of time in bed. There's a little bit more variation in when they're going to bed, but not a huge amount in terms of their bedtimes. But the key is that if we take this sleep window and we break it into two halves, it's really a story of two halves of the night. The first half, the individual is getting sleep. They're able to fall asleep easily. All of these nights, they're falling asleep easily. But what happens is around 4 hours later, they're waking up and they're having great difficulty in this back half. You can see how difficult it is for them to get back to sleep. They're actually in bed trying to sleep during this recording, but they just can't get back to sleep. This is more typical for the older adult. And what you're seeing here is the numbers. 3 hours, 368 minutes, that's just over 6 hours of actual sleep. The efficiency, just above 75%. The fragmentation is incredibly high at 41%, or 41. Think of it as the frequency of sleep disruption. That's not a percent, it's just an index. Okay, this is more typical of older adult sleep. One of the things that I should say too is we're starting to see this kind of data earlier and earlier in people's lives. Like we can now see this in people in their 40s and their 50s, whereas before we wouldn't see this until 60s and 70s. So this is accelerating, and it has a key reason why it's accelerating is because, as I mentioned earlier, we're all shift workers. We're shifting our sleep schedules and making it very difficult for our sleep accountant, something that I'm going to explain to you in a moment, to do its job. All right, so let's now look at, that was not Fitbit, sorry, that was motion watch data, but I just want to be clear that it doesn't matter which device you use. We can look at this. This is, again, consensus data. We know this to be the case for the average older adult. This is now PSG data where we see their total sleep time compared with a young adult is dramatically lower, just over 6 hours. Even though they're spending, if you look at TRT, total recording time, they're spending the same amount of time in bed. But this individual is spending much, much more time in bed awake instead of actually sleeping. And then when we look at this sleep efficiency number, we see that they're below 80%. Sleep durations less than 7 hours actual and sleep efficiencies less than 80% are predictive of accelerated aging and early cognitive decline. When we look at the sleep architecture, remember that slow wave sleep that I was talking about? That's stage 4 sleep. And when we look at where the dramatic difference is, it is that stage, the stage 4 sleep, the slow wave sleep that is dramatically reduced in older adults compared with young adults. And what we're seeing here is that older adults are getting less sleep, but they're also washing their brains less. They're not washing their brains at the same amount that young adults are. And so this explains to a degree what we're seeing in terms of a cognitive decline. The brain's able to compensate for a long time. It's a decades-long process, but eventually a price needs to be paid, and typically that price is paid in retirement. As I mentioned earlier, this process begins in our 30s and accelerates into our 60s, and then it becomes a cascade downward in our older adult years. One of the things that I didn't mention on the earlier slide, when I was talking about the frontal cortex and I was talking about the neurons where they're not getting washed, you can see that there's this accumulation of neurotoxicity in the front of the brain first. We now know that it's those neurons that drive slow wave sleep. So this helps explain what we see in Alzheimer's disease, where the individual, isn't getting the sleep they need, and that accelerates a cascade down. If you're accumulating toxicity around the neurons that are responsible for driving slow wave sleep, and it's that slow wave sleep that washes the brain, you get this cascade toward poor health and poor sleep health status. But if you are improving that, you can actually get this virtuous cycle where you could actually improve your ability to get that slow wave sleep by washing the frontal cortex. So hopefully we've really hammered that. But now what I want you to understand is what you can do about it. So we'll break this into two sections. But what we're going to talk about first is something called circadian rhythms. They're daily biological rhythms. You can think of it as they are the rhythms of life. We have daytime physiology, biology, and behavior, and we have nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. And those two things need to be kept separate in time because they're actually incompatible processes. And so they have to be kept separate in time. Day is day and night is night. And the problem, as I've been mentioning, is that we're all shift workers. We change our sleep schedules from night to night and week to week. We have weekday schedules and we have weeknight schedules. And so it's not just shift workers who are turning their days into nights and their nights into days. It's actually all of us. And the degree to which you do that has a profound impact on your circadian regulation, your health of these circadian rhythms. Again, daytime versus nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. And so what we want, the job of these circadian rhythms is to predict our environment. Think of it as a pacemaker or a clock that says this is day and this is night, so that we get the programming right. And so what's happened is that because sleep's the first thing we sacrifice to meet the growing demands of work, family, and social life balance. Because of that, we are breaking down that internal clock. We're breaking it down. And so the key then is to restore the functioning. How do you fix a broken clock? So I'm going to take you through it and understand. Today we have 90 minutes to talk about this. I provide a course that's 6.5 hours long to provide all of the science that people need. And so I'm pummeling you today with this information. You can think of it as you're drinking from a fire hose. You're just getting inundated with this information. Now, it's recorded, so you'll be able to play it back if you want later. The objective for the remainder of the talk is to really focus on what you can do to get better sleep. And the first thing I want you to understand is understanding your sleep accountant. That's a euphemism that I use. Think of it as a physiological process that is tracking your previous sleep-wake history, figuring out, what your current sleep debt is. How much sleep are you getting versus how much you actually needed? And its job is to balance the books. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that no 2 days are the same. As much as I've shown you the elite sleep chart and said, you need to get deep sleep in the front and REM and light sleep in the back half, the actual amounts of deep and REM and light sleep that you need vary depending on the kind of day you've had, as well as what your current sleep debt level is. And so some days there's a ton of new learning. I'm hoping that tonight is a ton of new learning for you. And so that requires an entirely different kind of sleep than, say, a physically demanding day where you're just exhausted from doing hard physical manual labor, say. Other days are incredibly exhausting from a stressful point of view, where you're just psychologically, you just can't take any more. That's an entirely different kind of day. So it's important to understand that no 2 days are the same, and the kind of sleep you need is going to change from night to night based on what kind of day you had, as well as what your relative sleep debt levels are. And so what I want you to really keep in mind is that we actually evolved to have this sleep accountant to take care of that for us. We don't need to be taking drugs to make sure we get more deep sleep to wash our brain. Like, just to speak very quickly about that, when the research came out that showed that sleep actually quite literally washes our brain of the day's toxicity, one of the toxic components is something called beta amyloid, which is a key component that increases our Alzheimer's risk. And so pharmaceutical companies, when they learned that slow wave sleep washed beta amyloid from the brain, they started working immediately on drug trials to boost slow wave sleep to wash the brain, and thinking it would be a cure for Alzheimer's or a prevention of Alzheimer's. But it didn't work. The trials didn't work the way they would have expected. And actually, if they understood circadian rhythms and if they understood sleep health and the sleep accountant, they'd know why. If you promote one stage of sleep, if you just focus on slow wave sleep, it means you're inhibiting REM sleep and light sleep. And when you do that, you're taking away the processing, the consolidation of learning and memory and all of those things. So when they didn't get the data, hopefully they've abandoned that now. The thing I want you to understand is the importance of actually letting your sleep accountant do its job. Just build a sleep window, protect that sleep window, and let your sleep accountant fill it with the sleep you need. All right, so how do you do that? Well, the first thing is to understand these circadian rhythms that I've been telling you about. Daytime physiology, biology, and behavior versus nighttime physiology, biology, and behavior. What we need is to promote strong circadian regulation. We need to be able to tell our brain and our body, this is day and this is night. And those two things are very separate. They're different. Now, how do you do that? Well, the very first thing to do is to tell your clock what time it is. There are things that are daytime and there are things that are nighttime. And so what I've got here at the bottom are cues that tell us that it's day. We evolved. These processes are ancient. We see them in every organism. And the solar day-night cycle is one of the core time cues that distinguishes day from night. That's pretty obvious. So getting a ton of light during the day, daylight, is critical. But we have gone against that. For a very large part of the population, we spend our days indoor. In fact, in Canada, we have enormous changes of season in terms of day length. Some days in the summertime, we can have really long days where the sun is up before 5 a.m. and doesn't set until 9:30. Very, very long day. But in the winter, you can have incredibly short days where the sun doesn't rise until after 8 and it sets around 4 or 4:30. Meaning that the total daylight is actually, not much more than 8 hours. For best health, we need 12 hours of light and 12 hours of the absence of that light. And so we're not getting enough daylight. Now, I realize that UV is an issue. And so I'm talking about UV protected exposure to sunlight. We do need some sunlight that is to produce vitamin D. So you can't be slathering yourself in sunscreen and not getting any vitamin D through sunlight. So the sun is critical for life and for circadian regulation. Another daytime signal is meal times. We evolved to have a 16-hour waking day and an 8-hour sleep window, essentially, during which we would get at least 7 to 7.5 hours of actual sleep. Like, that's the average that we're really shooting for. If we have high sleep efficiency, you can get 7.5 hours out of an 8-hour sleep window. That's essentially what we're shooting for. When we're talking about meal times, this is something that's really interesting. We've actually changed to the point where we eat as a social thing rather than for metabolic need. But we actually evolved to have an 8-hour, I know this is going to sound just freakish, but we actually evolved to have an 8-hour meal window and a 16-hour fast for absolute optimal health. But most of us have a much longer meal window, like over 12 hours, where we'll eat breakfast and then we'll be eating dinner very late at night, close to our bedtimes, because we get home from work, it takes time to cook the food, then we have our meal with our family, and just a couple hours later, if we're going to get the sleep we need, because Dr. Glenn's saying that we got to get our sleep, we're going to bed, and our meal time is butted right up against that. And what I want you to understand is that meals are a daytime signal. And if your largest meal of the day is actually your dinner, it means that you're starting your day right before bed. And so you end up with a daytime light signal that says the beginning of day is, say, 7 o'clock in the morning. But your mealtime signal is saying that the beginning of day is 7 o'clock at night. They're in antiphase. And this produces a lot of the poor sleep drivers that we look at, as well as overall poor health. What I want you to take away from this part of the talk is that it's not just what you do that matters. It's when you do it that matters as much or more. We all know that we need to eat right, we need to exercise, and that we need to get plenty of sleep. But what a lot of people don't understand is that when you eat has a profound impact on how your body is able to use that food. In the same way that your brain and body must be prepared for sleep, your brain and body must be prepared for the food you're going to eat. It anticipates that and prepares the digestive system and everything so that that food can be used properly. And if that's happening before bedtime, you're going to have a profound impact on your capacity for sleep. We need to actually make sure that we're allowing lots of time between our final meal of the day and our sleep window. And then the final piece to talk about is really this physical activity. And I want you to understand that it's not just about exercise. So physical activity guidelines have long said that, 3 to 5 hours, an hour of exercise, 3 to 5 days a week is the guideline. But those guidelines are changing now because they've seen lots of data of people that are getting exercise for an hour, 3 to 5 times a week, and they're not showing the performance gains or the health gains that they would have expected to see. And the reason for that is what they're seeing in actigraph data, like Fitbit data. What they're seeing is that people will wear it like a badge of honor. They've gone to the gym, they've worked out for their hour, and then the rest of their day, they're at the office or they're sedentary. And so that has a huge impact on our ability to get the sleep we need, because our physical activity levels during the day are a daytime signal. If we are active every hour, and if you remember, I had said we're going to take a pause, that was to break up sedentary time because I wanted to make sure that we weren't sedentary for over an hour. In fact, I try to break up sedentary time every 30 minutes. So there's some key things for you to understand about what we want to do in terms of telling our clock that it's day. Lots of bright light. Meal times scheduled to start the day, the middle of the day, and the end of day. And physical activity, breaking up sedentary time every 30 to 60 minutes for the whole day. So what you want is to coordinate those time cues. Light to start your day, meal times, physical activity through the day. And then the opposite is true for nighttime. That's avoiding blue light. Blue is an important light because it's a light that actually has an impact on a hormone that's really important. It's called melatonin. You've probably heard of it. And so it turns out that electronics, LED backlit devices, actually turn off melatonin levels. And melatonin is a hormone that rises 2 hours, it begins to rise 2 hours before your normal bedtime. And it actually plays a huge role in preparing the brain and body for sleep. So if you're one of those people that can't shut your brain off before bed, so you're lying in bed and you're still perseverating about the day that you had, or you're worrying about the day to come, that's actually an indicator that you don't have the right levels of melatonin, and you're not able to actually turn off your brain, the waking part of your brain, and turn on the sleep part of your brain. So that's key. All right. Other parts that are nighttime is the absence of food. Remember, I had said we actually evolved for an 8-hour food window and a 16-hour fast. Breakfast actually comes from the term break fast. So it's important for us to have a long fast through the night. Another signal is sedentary time. At night, when we're sleeping, we're not supposed to be active. And so earlier when I was showing you those charts where the older adult is waking up after about 4 hours of sleep and then not being able to get back to sleep, very often what will happen is, even sleep hygienists will say that if you're in bed and you can't sleep and it's been more than 15 minutes, then get up and do something until you can fall asleep. And they're well-meaning, but from a circadian rhythms perspective, that's poor advice. We want to protect the sleep window by eliminating sedentary time during the day and eliminating activity at night. We want to promote sedentary at night. Before we move on to the next section, I can't stress enough, I know you've gotten this point, but it's critical that we are consistent in our time cues. Daytime is signaled by bright light, preferably sunlight, meals, and the absence of sedentary time, activity. And night is signaled by darkness, the absence of food, or think fasting, and the absence of activity. If you're exercising too close to bedtime, you're going to have a really hard time getting to sleep. All right. So let's finish this section by bringing it all together. Here's how you fix a broken clock. So I'm using the motion watch data here. That's not really the important part, but what I want you to see is it all starts with protecting a sleep window. So you've got to figure out what time you're going to be going to bed on a routine basis. And I would encourage you to start with what time you have to get up during the weekdays and then build it from there. So if you know that you've got to be up, say at 7 a.m., and you want to make sure that you're getting late at night, which has an impact on our sleep. Again, I realize I'm pummeling you with this. The other thing to do is to combine those time cues. So making sure that you've got a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner, and also making sure that you've got at least, and I mean at least, 4 to 5 hours of gap between your final meal and the beginning of your sleep window. And then you want to use the food you eat. So you want to be active after meal times, and you want to break up sedentary time throughout the day, providing really strong signals that this is day. And then how are you going to show that it's night? Well, the first thing is that you want to preserve that melatonin onset. You don't want to take melatonin before bed. That's not going to result in the kind of sleep that you're hoping for. What you want to do is promote natural melatonin release or synthesis. And so by being active during the day, breaking up sedentary time, and getting a ton of UV protected sunlight during the day, that actually will increase how much melatonin you're going to produce at night. It begins rising 2 hours before your bedtime. So what you want to do is you want a blue block. You want to have these blue blockers. Orange lenses block blue. And so you want to have that to block the blue light 2 hours before your bedtime so that you don't turn off that melatonin, and you want to avoid light through your entire sleep window. That's the key to really fixing a broken clock. All right. And so what we're going to do now, what time are we at? We're at 6:05. So let's come back at 10 after 6. We're going to take another break. We're going to break sedentary time by walking around for 5 minutes. And then we're going to come back and I'm going to show you my Fitbit data next so that you can see how I bring that intervention to my own life, and you can see it in my Fitbit data, and you'll have, you know, a template for you to try to replicate with your own Fitbit data so that you can get the sleep that I get. So let's take that break. Still come back at 10 after, please. Thank you.
I believe you can get me through the night. Ooh, dream weaver, I believe we can reach the morning light. Fly me high through the starry skies, baby, to an astral plane. Cross the highways of fantasy. Help me to forget today's pain. Ooh, dream weaver, I believe you can get me through the night. Ooh, dream weaver, I believe we can reach the morning light. Though the dawn may be coming soon, there still may be some time. Fly me away to the bright side of the moon. Meet me on the other side. Ooh, dream weaver, I believe you can get me through the night. Ooh, dream weaver, I believe we can reach the morning light. Dream weaver.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. So I've spent a huge amount of time talking about sleep and the importance of sleep, and I've talked about how to fix a broken clock. But now I want to show you lived experience, like real data on the Fitbit. And so this, for those of you that aren't familiar with Fitbit, I just want to familiarize you with, this is a Fitbit dashboard. So what you do is you wear your Fitbit. You got to wear the Fitbit 24/7, except when charging or bathing. And the reason for that is that it uses your 24-hour heart rate variability in its algorithms to determine your sleep staging. They don't provide us with it's proprietary data. So we don't have all of the information about the algorithms, but I can tell you that I've been working with the Fitbit data for over 7 years now. And it's fairly, I wouldn't say it's perfect. To be honest, it's far from perfect. No device is the perfect device, but it does give us coachable data. And so let me take you through that. So the first thing on the left-hand side, this is your physical activity profile. And I will tell you this, Fitbit isn't the best device in terms of physical activity metrics. The Oura Ring and Garmin, each wearable has its own niche. And I would say that Fitbit's niche is sleep staging. But first, let's look at this. What this is telling you is that for today, I got 20,000 steps and, 45 floors and walked 9 miles, burnt, a ton of calories, all of that. And when we break this out, I've actually been wearing this so I don't wear my Fitbit all the time, but I've been wearing it for the last just over a week. And that's because I've got this event that's coming up in San Diego where I'm going to be working with CEOs of multinationals. So it's a big event, and I've been doing sleep coaching for these multinational CEOs, execs. And so the target, I wanted to show them, that it actually works, and that if you follow the program, you'll get the results you're looking for. And so you can see that I'm trying to get at least 15,000 steps each day, and I'm pretty much hitting the mark. I did have, a day on the weekend where I didn't get there, and nobody's perfect, but it gives us an indicator of the kind of activity levels that I'm doing. And I can tell you, I am not a physical activity freak at all, but it's just a function of making sure that I'm getting up and I'm doing that. The part where we just took our 2 breaks, this is really the key thing that I want you to understand. What you're looking at here is a measure of sedentary time and how often you're sedentary. And so in this, a red filled in circle means that in that hour, so here we've got 7 a.m. From the hour from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., you can see that I got at least 250 steps over the last 7 days in that hour block. In fact, there's only one day this week where I missed a time that I didn't get those 250 steps, and it still kind of bugs me, to be honest with you. I was doing data analysis and I was having a problem with one of the charts, and the Fitbit told me that I hadn't got my 250 steps. And it said, hey, Glenn, you got to get up. And I was thinking to myself, yes, I'm going to get up. I'm going to get my 250 steps, but I just got to solve this problem first. So I can tell you, even a trained professional can make a mistake and miss it. And I realized that remember, this is for elite sleep. The closer you get to these numbers, the better your sleep's going to be. But this is a key metric of daytime signaling, breaking up sedentary time every half hour to every hour. So that's what you're seeing on this chart. And then another key is really understanding the impact that exercise can have. And when you are active, remember, it's not just what you do that matters, but when you do it. If we're exercising too late in the day, like right up against our sleep, it's going to have an impact on our sleep. And I'm going to show you that. So trained professional that I am, you can see I decided here that I was going to wear it and really start to put this data set together for the group. And what you can see here is I'm getting over 8 hours of sleep each night, with the exception of that one. And again, I'm not saying that you need to get 8 hours actual sleep every single night, but remember, I have this gene that predisposes me to Alzheimer's disease, and I've seen it in my grandfather, concerned about it for my father, and definitely concerned about it for myself and my children. And so this is a key thing. So that's why I am as crazy as I am about making sure that I get the sleep I need. So you can see I've set the bar here and I'm hitting it each night. But keep this in mind, doing a deep dive into the data, it's not just how many hours of sleep, but what about the actual sleep architecture. And so here you can see, this is an example, trained sleep professional, but you could see right here, I got light sleep and then REM instead of deep sleep right away. Well, here's what happened. On this particular night, I went to my in-laws' place. We have Sunday night dinners, and I went to my in-laws' place. Whoops, lost the data there. I went to my in-laws' place, and they have late dinners, and I didn't want to be rude, so I ate some food late. I tried not to eat very much, but I did still eat right up against my bedtime, and it had an impact in that my deep sleep was delayed. And actually, to be honest with you, this has been a bit of a struggle this week. This hasn't been great data in the sense that I am consistently missing out on deep sleep at the front half. And the reason for that in these ones is that I've been so busy that the exercise that I've been doing has been late in the day. So it hasn't been super late, but any exercise that I do for myself, I notice any exercise that I'm doing after, say, 5 p.m. actually has an impact on delaying my deep sleep numbers. So the cool thing is that by accessing Fitbit, I can see how I'm doing. And let's be clear, overall, I'm definitely doing well. I'm getting more than 8 hours of actual sleep each night, and I'm still getting my deep sleep numbers close to 90 minutes, close to 2 hours for REM. I'm doing well. It's just not quite as well as I would like to, but of course, trained professional, and I'm overly picky about how I sleep. But this is the kind of thing I want you to be able to use and have. And again, I don't have shares in Fitbit. I'm not trying to sell Fitbit. I don't get any compensation from Fitbit, but it's just a tool that's available to you that could give you real insight beyond what your subjective personal opinion is about your sleep. You can actually verify, are you getting the sleep you think you're getting? Now, remember, scheduling is absolutely critical. And notice this, my scheduled bedtime is 10:15 and I'm up for 7:15. And I do not use an alarm clock. I just allow myself to wake up naturally because I want to wake up out of REM sleep naturally. But you can see that definitely during this period of time, I've been very precise about getting to bed, falling asleep. Now, this isn't just the time that I'm getting into bed. This is actually the time that I am falling asleep. And you can see that I'm falling asleep quite easily. And the reason for that is that I've been using blue blockers. I'm an extreme night owl. It's very difficult for me to get to bed at night unless I preserve my melatonin levels by making sure that I'm blue blocking before bed. So not the sexiest thing to be wearing these around the house for a couple of hours before bedtime, but it's something that I do to make sure that I protect my melatonin levels and that I'm able to get to sleep on time. And again, I'm not perfect. You can see that I'm not getting the deep sleep right away. I am still getting lots of deep sleep, but not right away. And so there's still room for even me to improve, even though I'm working really hard at it. Okay, so I wanted to leave a ton of time for Q&A, and so I'm going to end here and open it up for questions for the remainder.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Glenn. We're going to get started with questions. And I'm just going to take a minute to invite Sarah James, occupational therapist, back on. And I see she's got her camera on. So we'll get started. So Glenn, you mentioned you had kids in there. And so are you all wearing orange glasses at night? And if not, do you have strategies that you're using with your kids right now to, obviously you're modeling the behavior?
Yes. Yeah, so thanks for that question, Jennifer. So the one person that doesn't is my wife. I have zero control there. But I can tell you, this is really cool. So my kids have taken the course, and just to give you some perspective there, my daughter is 12, turning 13, and my son is just turning 14. And my wife is an extreme early bird. She has a lot of difficulty staying asleep. She wakes up too early. And it's super easy for her to fall asleep at night. My daughter has that same clock. So we found out that she was waking up. We were sleeping, but she was up around 4:30 in the morning and just sort of quietly being around the house and the living room. So once we figured that out, yes, my daughter she's not wearing these ones. She wears ones that are a little bit cooler looking than that. But she blue blocks in the morning until she goes out the door to go to school. And my son has my pacemaker, my clock. And so he's probably blue blocking. Oh, not yet, but he'll be blue blocking really soon. And so, yes, he blue blocks at night like I do. And my daughter blue blocks in the morning.
Interesting. Amazing. Well, I think we all picked up some pretty amazing strategies, and I'm so glad we recorded it, because you're right, people are going to want to go back and also make a little Amazon list. But I think in terms of the questions, our community is a community of families affected by juvenile arthritis, and I think that one of the things we'll want to talk about is there's discipline, and then there's like challenges that are out of your control. So you can do a lot of the right things, but things like pain and extreme worry. And so I wonder about your research or some of your suggestions around those sort of out of your control factors.
That's an awesome question too. Okay, so let's be clear about one thing. So we've known this for decades, that there's a bidirectional relationship between mental health and sleep. So poor sleepers can end up with poor mental health, and people that were great sleepers that are dealing with life and stressors and everything can have an impact on their sleep. So it's bidirectional. That exact same relationship exists for pain. You could be a great sleeper, but then pain is going to wake you up and it's going to disrupt you, and it can have a profound impact on circadian rhythms too, right? So what you want is to understand that by promoting stronger circadian rhythms, by promoting stronger health, sleep health status, you can actually improve a person's pain tolerance. And so that bidirectional relationship, addressing circadian rhythms, I'm not saying, I realize pain's real and there are pain management tools, and it's cool to hear that the next session is going to be about pain management. I actually would like to see that. But pain management is one piece. Addressing sleep health and circadian regulation will help with that.
Interesting. So Sarah, I'll invite you in, but so what are you seeing in clinic and in terms of sleep challenges?
Yeah, I think this is a very common issue that comes up in clinic with sleep challenges for children with JAA and also other rheumatic diseases. And I think it can be very tough. And as Glenn mentioned, there are so many factors that play into this. So we know that this can then have such a profound impact on the way the kids function during the day. So it's a very big topic. And I think Glenn has illustrated so nicely the massive effects that it can have. And I think in relation to your question around barriers with families and having those challenges, I think having very open conversations with children and families is so important when it comes to this, and sitting down as a family and working out maybe together what would be the best bedtime routines. And as Glenn was saying, kind of picking those windows that you could aim for your protected sleep time, and then working your routines around that. So I think coming with it as a family, so you're not fighting with your kids about sleep. We don't want to turn this into something that becomes more of a stress. And I think with the tracking can be such a powerful tool. However, I think if you're a person who, or either as a parent or from a child perspective, if you're likely to become more stressed looking at all of this data and then having some more performance anxiety around sleep, maybe you don't want to be tracking your sleep so closely if that's going to then make that harder for you. So just looking at it from a very individual perspective, I think is so important in all of the families that we see. And I think, yeah, having those very open conversations as a family is so important.
Can I just add to that? Sarah, you brought up a huge point. Thank you for that. You're absolutely right. I remember when I first started doing this, I was working with older adults, and at the end of my talks, I'd have some health professionals that would come up and say, Glenn, love the enthusiasm, but please don't do these talks anymore because you're scaring people about the need for sleep and you're going to stress them. And we know that stress and anxiety are problems for being able to get the sleep you need. And so I 100% agree with Sarah here. What we need to do is use the tools, but take the stress out of it. Understand that there are things we can do, and you don't have to do it by yourself. There are trained professionals out there that can help you with your sleep. That's what I do for a living now. And so, yes, it's absolutely important to take away the stressors, but there's another point that there are tools that are available that we can use as long as we use them well. And I think that's the takeaway here, is making sure that you're using them well for good and not for stressing yourself out.
Okay, I'm going to go with a specific question from one of our attendees. So her daughter is 14 and she has a rare rheumatic condition called CRMO. She sleeps a lot and she goes to sleep easily, but she's always very tired. Of course, there's a question of the impact of the disease, but the question is, like, is there a way to know if she's not getting quality sleep, even though she is logging the hours? And I guess the Fitbit is one of the tools and ways to know.
Yeah, but one thing I will say too is that the Fitbit works a lot better, I think, with with adults, mature adults, than young children. So that's a key point. Mm-hmm. I first started using the Fitbit with my kids when they were like 8, and the data wasn't really usable. Mm-hmm. But now that they're teens, we're able to use it. And I think it's got to do with their algorithms. So that's the first thing I think we should mention, is that it's an individual. It's not a one size fits all approach. I love what Sarah said. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I need to caution here, I spent a ton of time talking about sleep as though it's the most important thing in life. It isn't. It's just one piece, right? We spend 1/3 of our lives sleeping. The other 2/3 of our lives are really important too. And so this is not a cure-all for everybody. And it is important to understand that there are so many factors in life that, have an impact on our overall health and performance. And so this is just one piece of the puzzle.
On the guidance side, we had another question about a very active 10-year-old and just a question about the recommended amount of sleep per night.
Yeah, so for a 10-year-old, you're definitely going to be wanting to shoot for something not 8 hours, but probably more like 10. And so we know that children, they're growing, they're learning, they're developing, and so they need more sleep. And so what you would be wanting to see is more like, whereas an adult, you're looking for 7 to 9. For, a young child in that, that preteen age, you're probably looking at 8 to 10 hours of actual sleep. And certainly our teenagers, we're not setting them up for success because their schedules are so demanding and they're definitely not getting the sleep that they really need. And for younger children, let's just address that too. For younger children, you want to see 10 to 12 hours of sleep. And for infants, of course, 12 to 14.
Sarah, are you guys adjusting recommended sleep time for kids with rheumatic disease? Are you suggesting more sleep?
Not typically more sleep. And again, this can be an individual thing, but I think similar to what Glenn said. So for those primary and or elementary, and middle school age, about that 9 to 11 hour mark. And then for 14 to 17-year-olds, it's still around the 8 to 10 hour mark. But I think within that range, people find where they feel best and have the most energy throughout the day, depending on their sleep schedule. So no, we tend to stick with the generic guidelines in terms of the amount of sleep for our population.
Yes. So Glenn, you covered a little section on drugs and sleep. So we're gonna have a rapid fire drug round because we've got a few questions. So cool drugs such as Distran, bad or good for sleep?
So I believe it or not, I'm going to give you the same answer. And that is that my advice is to do your very best to let your sleep accountant figure out the sleep you need. And the reason for that is that whatever drug that you may throw at me, whether CBD, alcohol, caffeine, sleep aids, they will have an impact. If they have an impact on the neurotransmitter systems that either promote wakefulness or promote sleep, they're going to have an impact on sleep architecture. And if they do, they will promote sleep for a selective sleep stage, and they will inhibit the other stages. So this is actually one where there is a one-size-fits-all question and answer, and that is build the sleep window, protect the sleep window, and let your sleep accountant figure out the sleep you need and the staging. If you're promoting slow wave sleep, it's at the expense of REM. If you're promoting REM, it'll be at the expense of deep. So that's really critical. Let your sleep accountant do its job. It'll tell you the sleep you need as long as you do the things to unhandcuff it.
Mm-hmm. And that sticks true for melatonin supplement in children at night?
Yeah, so let's talk about melatonin. So there is, I just told you how important melatonin is. And we don't have time for me to take you through the impact of melatonin, but let me just tell you this. If you're giving melatonin before bedtime, let's say that it's an hour to 2 hours before bedtime, then you're likely, what happens is there's something called a phase response curve. The impact of melatonin depends on the time of day that you take it. And so here's the interesting thing. Remember, I've been saying all along, it's not just what you do that matters, it's when you do it. If you take melatonin before bed, and there was a time, and this may still be happening for some docs, but there was a time when older adults would come in and they'd say, hey, instead of taking a sleep aid, take melatonin. Well, here's the problem. If you take melatonin an hour to 2 hours before bed, it has chronobiological effects. It means that it has an impact on the pacemaker itself. It causes a phase advance. And so you will be able to fall asleep quicker. But the problem is that older adults typically don't have problems falling asleep. They have problems staying asleep. And what melatonin before bedtime will do is cause a phase advance, and it'll cause you to wake up earlier, and there will be no hope of you being able to get back to sleep. So it takes an existing condition for older adults and makes it worse. And for children, I can't say the same thing. It'll still have the same chronobiological effects, but children are better sleepers, so you may not see that as much. But the problem is that you do not want daytime physiological levels of melatonin. And one thing I will say is that dosing of melatonin, the physiological effect is at much lower doses. So 1.5 milligrams is enough to have the physiological effect of advancing the clock. And the thing is that when you get it at the store, it's like 3 milligrams or 5 milligrams, and I've heard of 10 milligrams. So it's much more potent than what is required for a physiological impact. And I'm not convinced that you wouldn't do better by blue blocking and managing light exposure around bedtime. And the other thing, Sarah, I thank you so much for your comments, because it's critical that you don't make bedtimes a fight with your kids. So what you do is you use the tools that will make it easy for them to sleep. They'll fall asleep naturally. I can tell you that my son, it was a battle at first, but once we got him wearing these, he goes to bed because he's tired and he's ready for sleep. And with my daughter, it wasn't a battle, because once she blue blocked, she was able to sleep longer and she felt good about it. So do not make it an argument. Help your kids reach that level of efficacy that they want to.
Yeah, I'm hearing like, let sleep be the natural part of your day that it should and can be, and find that rhythm to
I agree, 100%.
Sarah, I'm going to direct this one to you, but we did have a couple questions about prednisone insomnia, and I just wondered if you could weigh in on that.
Yeah, I think I've seen that question come up a few times here, and I think one of the particularly interesting comments was that at the higher doses that they noticed the insomnia was worse. So I think what we know about prednisone is that it can cause some difficulty sleeping, so both getting to sleep and staying asleep, and it is usually related to the dose, with increased doses making it a little bit more challenging. And this doesn't mean that for everyone who's on prednisone, they're going to have difficulty sleeping, but some people will find that they have some difficulty either falling asleep or staying asleep with prednisone. And I think what's so important to remember is that when children or teens are prescribed prednisone, that it is typically for quite a short duration. It's kind of used as a bridging while maybe another medication is kicking in just to make you feel better, to get through your days without being in so much pain. So it's used for a short duration, usually as short as time as possible, and then that the dose is reduced as well. So that means hopefully that if the prednisone is having the side effect of disrupting the sleep, we're hoping that it will be for a short time and not something that will be prolonged over time. And I think maybe the flip side of this that is nice to keep in mind as well, that if prednisone is reducing pain, we know that pain can have such an influence, as Glenn was just reminding us, the direction, but the relationship between pain and sleep. So perhaps if the pain is being reduced, for some people, they might find that they're actually sleeping a little better. So I think when it comes to trying to overcome some of the challenges with prednisone, I think definitely chatting with your doctors, because I do understand that sometimes the timing of the prednisone can impact on the sleep. So it may be, for example, taking it in the morning if possible with your dosing, but of course chat with your doctors, but that can make it better for some people. So even having that in mind, if your child or teen is going on prednisone at some point, maybe having that discussion with your doctors at the onset. And then I think using all of these great strategies that Glenn has already chatted about this evening in terms of promoting a good night's sleep still hold true for these same sleep challenges with prednisone. There's no differences really in terms of what we manage in terms of strategies. There's nothing, unfortunately, no special thing that we have that will really help this specific difficulty with sleep. It's still all those same wonderful strategies. And I think it can be a nice time to really try to use those strategies and then hang on to them after the prednisone has been tapered off. But I really appreciate that it can be a challenging time.
So can I just add one thing on that? I, again, couldn't agree more with what Sarah's saying. She's right on the mark. I do think it's worth looking at time of day dependent impacts. So there could be, and this is going to be individual in the sense that just because we all have, it like right now it's 20 to 7 for me, that's, daytime, but it doesn't mean that physiologically that's what time it is for me. So looking at time of day impacts and tailoring it to the individual probably could be helpful.
Well, we'll just ask a couple more questions because you mentioned it's 20 to 7. And I
Thanks,
know we have
everybody.
quite a few East Coast and Ontario attendees, and I bet they're a little anxious about
I
getting
just sleep
to bed
deprived everybody, didn't I?
I just wanted to ask a couple questions before we go. And one is a couple of questions around sleep aids. So benefits of a weighted blanket.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So what I can tell you is that I am not aware of any evidence-based, randomized controlled trials that show that weighted blankets are going to have, a clinical impact. However, what I can tell you is if you've tried it and it works for you, that's all that I care about. It's really, in the science, we tend to want to be able to break everything down and understand the mechanism of impact. But if it's helping you sleep, great. That's all that matters to me. Unless it's a drug.
Unless it's a drug. So the way, actually, we did have one. And I was thinking it was more like so it's a drug not used for sleep, but for pain relief, but a CBD cream oil. Is there any?
Yeah, so let's talk about, we should have talked about CBD. And again, I apologize for how long we went and that I'm keeping everybody up, especially on the East Coast. I appreciate you doing that for us. CBD. So a lot of times it's a push-pull, right? So we've got pain management issues. So we need to do things because we're in so much pain, we're not going to be able to sleep anyways. But it's important to understand that CBD, it's not like alcohol in the sense that there's a ton of information about alcohol and the impacts it has. CBD has only been legalized for a relatively short period of time. So the RCTs and clinical trials and really understanding what's going on with that, what I can tell you is that CBD is actually more potent than THC as a REM depriver. And so at least the early studies are showing that, whereas you're going to be able to, it's doing some benefits, there is this takeaway, which is that you're not getting as much REM as you otherwise would. So, you know, it's one of those things where you have to titrate dose, and you've got to figure these things out and look at time of day in terms of when you're using and things like that, just so that you protect your sleep as best you can.
Is there anything you wanted to add on that, Sarah?
No, I think that was a great summary. Thanks, Glenn.
Perfect. Okay, so for our last question, and I just appreciated this person obviously loves the science of it, and I think we'll all get a good baseline to walk away with. So the question is, what are normal values for efficiency and fragmentation?
Oh, that's a great, okay, so don't worry about fragmentation, because there isn't a tool that you're going to be able to get the fragmentation. But sleep efficiency is a part of consolidation. And so you really want to be shooting for 90%, especially like children are great sleepers. Now I realize there's pain management issues in this population. So that could have an impact on sleep efficiencies, but you really want to be above 85%. And, you know, children and teens they can be great sleepers. So you could see high 90, or not high 90s, but in the 90s for sleep efficiency. And then a lot of the focus of this talk deliberately was for caregivers and the adults in the room, and really be prepared for sleep efficiencies that are just above 85, something in the 86, 87%, but shoot for 90. And if you're below 75%, and if you have any questions for any reasons, glenn@elitesleep.ca. Just email me. I know we didn't get as much time for questions as I would have liked, and that's my fault. I apologize, everybody. Pummeling everyone with questions, but you can always reach out by email, Glenn with 2 N's, glenn@elitesleep.ca, and I'll answer your questions. Just in the subject line, just say that you saw the Cassie and Friends talk. That's
so nice. Well, thank you so much, Glenn. Thank you, Sarah. I think no one would believe that you guys met for the first time online tonight, because you're actually a really good pair.
Sarah, you did an awesome job. You hit the marks.
Oh, I really enjoyed your talk. So thanks so much, Glenn.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
That was amazing. Thank you. And I'd also just like to thank our Cassie and Friends team. I'd like to thank Brittany Barnes, Kelly Adamanchuk, and our volunteer Jennifer Wren, who are helping in the chat function tonight. Sounds like we might need a sleep session part 2. And I just again welcome everyone to visit cassieandfriends.ca for more information about how you can get involved or support future events like this. So thank you very much. And with that, I will wish everyone good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.